Hello chess friends and welcome to Zarov chat channel and welcome back to the FTX Crypto Cup tournament in 2021. We have reached now the semi-final stage, and in my opinion the derby of the day was the match game between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and Teimour Radjabov. So Teimour Radjabov recently plays really brilliant this tournament, this online rapid tournament. He won also recently one great event, so it's always a pleasure to watch Teimour Radjabov playing, because you never know what's going to happen. And also in this other semi-finals we have really great match between Bxf6 against Nd4 Bd7. So this is really brilliant what's going on in this tournament. We're starting now the semi-finals with a great game played here by Teimour Radjabov with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen here with the black pieces. The first three games ended like this. The first two games ended in a draw, and then Magnus Carlsen won his game with the white piece. So it was simply time now for Teimour Radjabov to make something to happen, to maybe equalize the result, because if you're down in the result after the day one, then of course it's really hard to get back against the world champion Magnus Carlsen, because we know that he's a great positional and a great pragmatic player. So many times we have seen when Magnus wins simply the first day, then it's almost impossible to get back in the second day. So let's check out now the fourth game. I think it was also a little bit of the game of the day, because we had really some great tactical and strategical elements in the Ragozin defense. The Ragozin is a very sharp opening in the beginning, so I think for those who want to maybe to study the Ragozin and also to see how to counterplay Ragozin ideas, I think it's also a very instructive video. So let's check out now the game here. Teimour Radjabov opened with move d4, knight to f6 by Magnus. We have c4, e6, here knight to f3. We have talked about this idea. This is now the so-called counter to Nd4. If bishop to b4 happens, still we have opportunities to play knight to d2 or bishop to d2. At least we're not vulnerable to some ideas after bishop to b4 and then bishop takes c3. Then black could mess up the pawn structure. Then of course white is continuing the game with a double pawn structure on the c file. So that's why it's a pragmatic idea, many times played now in top grandmaster level. I think it's simply the best way to play against Bogo Indian, Nimzo Indian, Queen's Indian preparations by black. So here in the game d5 played by Magnus Carlsen, going now into normal Queen's Gambit decline. We have now knight to c3, the 3 knights variation of the Queen's Gambit decline, and now Magnus goes into the Ragozin defend with bishop to b4. Here, in my opinion, if you don't want to study so much theory, there is this line. You can play queen to a4 immediately, forcing now black to play the move knight to c6. The problem then after the move knight to c6 is that black cannot play immediately the move c5, because with the spinning idea with the move bishop to b4, you would love, of course, push the pawn here on c5, opening the position further, but it's not possible because the queen stops a little bit here black's progress on the queen side. So that's why, if you don't want to maybe study too much theory in the Ragozin from white perspective, I think this move queen to a4 is perfectly fine. But okay, as we said, here Teimour Radjabov has to win the game. He has to create no madness on the board. I'm sure that Magnus Carlsen knows his stuff after queen to a4, knight to c6, that he knows the theory very good. So after move knight to c3, here Teimour Radjabov played here simply bishop to g5. Counterpinning the knight, it is a risky choice, because when I face the Ragozin, I like simply this line, c takes d5, because I'm lazy to study more theory. I like to undermine the pressure like this, c takes d5. After something like e takes d5, I like to play bishop to f4 or bishop to g5, because then I know there no dynamics are anymore here in the center. At least I can counterplay here with the bishop move. So I think I have at least an equal game. So as said, but this top grandmaster, they love dynamics. I don't like so many dynamics on the board, so that's why I love here Teimour Radjabov's approach. He probably knows his preparation after the move bishop to g5, but we can notice that still there is here the tension, here is the tension, here is the tension. So simply too much tension now on the board. The best way here for black, what the engine for instance suggests, is to move here d takes c4 immediately, then followed with ideas of here c5 if the position allows it. Here simply breaking the queen side with the move c5. But okay, here after move bishop to g5, Magnus decides now to play the move h6, a different line. We have now bishop to f6. You don't want to, of course, retreat here. It could be, I think, very risky, because then you could face here this move, bishop to g5, kicking away the bishop, then bishop to g3, and then knight to e4. Could be very, very annoying, I think, to play against. Then after queen to c2, c5 could happen, f5, f4. So sometimes even this bishop can be trapped on g3. So be careful how to play the Ragozin. I think when you get challenged with the move h6, one of the most natural ways is simply to play bishop to f6. After queen to f6, now Teimour Radjabov plays this idea. He plays now this delayed queen to a4 move. Again, we can notice now black is pretty much forced to play the move knight to c6, and as we said, this move knight to c6, it blocks the potential c5 move by black. Now black would love to play, of course, the move c5 because black has the bishop pair. With the bishop pair, we want to open the position. Now the knight is blocking the c5 move out, at least some kind of a compensation here for white. White again is slightly better because the knights are still controlling the center very good here. Now after move e3, the bishop will come into the game, bishop to d3, then the bishop is perfectly fine. And what we can notice, of course, although black has the bishop pair, this bishop on c8, it's not so good because it's blocked out by its own pawn. So there is only one good bishop on the board. It's this bishop on b4. This is now the best minor piece of black. So as said, sometimes you can have a bishop pair, but it's not such a great bishop pair because the bishop on c8 has to be activated for in the game. So here e3 played by Teimour Radjabov. We have now castling, and now rook to c1. You may think maybe bishop to e2, bishop to d3 are more natural ideas, but many times you see in Slav defense or Queen's Gambit declined or many of these similar structures that white is delaying the bishop move. Why is white always delaying the bishop move? Because when you play with the bishop, many times you see this by black. Black will play then d takes c4, bishop to c4, and you have played already with the bishop, so it's sort of a loss of tempo. So that's why white many times plays around this move. White is delaying the bishop move, play simply around, as I said, play something like rook to c1 like Teimour Radjabov did here, and now maybe with ideas of a3, b4, simply kicking away further the bishop. If d takes c4 happens, at least we're getting out with the bishop with an extra tempo, sort of. We haven't played with the bishop before, so it's something that I also like to do, simply delaying the bishop move in Queen's Gambit declined. As I said, sometimes in Slav defense structures, simply leaving the position like this. When black takes, then of course I'm getting out, as we said, with the bishop with the tempo. So here queen to g6. Now Magnus is not allowing anymore here Teimour Radjabov to get out with the bishop. Bishop to e2, bishop to d3 can of course be met with queen takes g2. That's why h4 here by Teimour Radjabov. As we said, Teimour needs a win. Teimour needs now to create madness on the board. He has to now equalize the result, because it's the same. If Teimour loses with a 2-point difference, it's the same that he lost maybe with the 1-point difference. It's the result is clear. Then Magnus wins the first day. So that's why going really sharp into this game is really a great choice here by Teimour Radjabov. h4. We have rook to d8. Magnus now of course prepares some pawn breakthroughs in the center, because when the king is stuck in the center, then of course it's the best way to open the center. But also there is this rule: when you get attacked on the flanks, then it's very natural to counterattack in the center. So that's why this idea rook to d8 comes also with this strategy. So here h5 by Teimour Radjabov. We have queen to f6. Now a great move by Teimour. We have rook to h4 followed with rook to f4 preparations, then maybe creating also some tactics around the square f7. This could be also very dangerous in the continuation. Now Magnus, I think, makes already a mistake. He plays now the move e5. e5 is not so good, because you have to play, I think, first d takes c4, undermining the pressure here a little bit in center. Then maybe afterwards you can try the move e5. After bishop to c4, okay, e5 is not an immediate possibility, because you get then d takes e5, bishop to c3, maybe rook to c3. The problem is now you cannot take knight takes e5, because you get knight takes e5, queen to e5. But now this is the stunner, rook to e4 could happen, and the problem is now, of course, you cannot take queen to e4, then bishop to f7. So you would be forced here pretty much to go somewhere with the queen to f6. But now I think with the activity of this rooks here, white is simply strategically winning here. So again, we could try maybe something like here rook to e8, then rook takes e8, queen to e8, and you see now this bishop is pinned, so it's completely losing. Bishop to h7, bishop to d3 could happen, bishop to f7, bishop to g8. So again, I'm pointing out this is, I think, simply losing game for black. So that's why here after potential d takes c4, black would be forced after potential bishop to c4 to play queen to f5, and then preparing maybe this move e5, maybe also get first with the bishop out, maybe b6, bishop to b7, preparing this move e5, because we can notice, of course, that white cannot castle anymore. White can secure the king by playing king to f1, king to g1, but no castling for sure. And I think in the near future with the move e5, black could break the position and have a comfortable game. But e5 immediately without d takes c4 causes now many problems for Magnus Carlsen. It was too rushed, too fast move that Magnus Carlsen played. Now Teimour Radjabov simply takes c takes d5. Now rook to d5. Okay, you cannot take the rook, of course, but the rook is really unnatural there. The rook, it doesn't belong now in the center in such an early stage of the game. Still, the rook can be kicked away immediately, of course, with the move e4. Maybe not immediately, because if now e4 happens, it's not so good. You cannot play that move immediately, but again as a long-term plan, because as we said, the rook simply doesn't belong in the center. But you could make a mistake here and play the move e4. Let's see now the possible continuation. It's really cool what happens after potential e4 now. Here rook to d4 can be a possibility. Now knight to d4. You see, now this is the problem. After e takes d4, you could maybe counterattack with the move a3, but now here d takes c3, really white. And now after a takes b4, now comes the stunner c takes b2, and you have to now bring your rook here to b1. But now queen to c3 is, I think, simply winning the game. Whatever you do, you cannot go with your king. Even if you try here something like king to e2, then knight to d4 is simply here tactically losing for white. So really wild stuff. This rook sacrifice, as I said, is possible, so that's why pushing the pawn here on e4 is not a possibility. Here Teimour Radjabov undermines the pressure with the move d takes e5. Now bishop to c3, played by Magnus. We have rook to c3, and now knight to e5. But there is now one problem. This is simply a great example of lack of development. The lack of development in chess games is always present, I think, sometimes. And you see, now we have talked about this bad bishop situation in the beginning. The bishop on c8 was simply blocked out by its own pawn. Now Magnus Carlsen managed to open the position somehow for the bishop, but it's simply too late. Here Teimour Radjabov plays, of course, first queen to e8. We have now king to h7, and now pardon me, I get challenged. I cannot play, sorry. Here after move king to h7, here Teimour Radjabov makes now a tiny little inaccuracy. He plays the move rook to f4. It seems so that this move is great, but here instead of this move rook to f4, rook to d4 is much better, because now if, for instance, queen to e6 happens, if you want to undermine the pressure, if you want to simplify the game, then still here queen to e6, knight to f3 can happen, g takes f3, bishop to e6, but still after bishop to rook to d5, bishop to d5. But the problem is now this idea. You see, you're losing simply the game here on the 7th rank. Black could try here bishop to f3, but now we can take out this one. You could take out this one, but still we can take out this one, and I think this is now completely winning endgame here for white. So bishop to d3 can happen, also bishop to e4, then further playing something like rook to e7, kicking away maybe the rook, then also take out this pawn. When we get maybe two connected pass pawns here, it's simply a strategically lost game for black. So that's why after move rook to f4, as we said, rook to d4 would be much better. But now Magnus doesn't react correctly. After the move rook to f4, Magnus plays now the move queen to d6. Here Magnus should have proceeded with the move queen to b6. So you see, he allowed now, Teimour Radjabov allowed now Magnus Carlsen this continuation, which Magnus missed, unfortunately for him, because after rook to b6, here you have to play something like b4 to protect your b2 pawn. If you try now here knight to e5 immediately, it's not so good. You get queen to b2. Now even if you try something like bishop to d3, it's not helping you out. We get simply rook to d3. This is a really wild continuation. After rook to d3, now bishop to g4. This is now the tactic we're preparing here, the checkmate on e2. So now you see the queen is hanging. You could maybe take out, of course, here the bishop, but you lose also now the queen. And when we watch now the material, it's obvious that black is simply winning. So as said, it's not the point after move b6 that white is losing, because white still has this move b4, and the engine gives here equal chances for both sides. So at least we have protected this pawn on b4 somehow. But that said, it was simply a must move now for Magnus Carlsen. Unfortunately for him, he played now the inaccurate move. He played now the move rook to d6, and now Teimour Radjabov can regroup, can get the pieces into the game. Here bishop to e2. Now Magnus opens the position further because he's pinned here on the 8th rank, and now Teimour Radjabov can simply play knight to d4. Great move here, c6, and Teimour Radjabov simply grabs a pawn, knight to f5. Here we have queen to d8, queen to d8, rook to d8, and now knight to d4. We have bishop to d7, rook to e4, attacking the knight. Teimour Radjabov is up a whole pawn. He has now really a dominant position all over the board. the knight is challenged, you have to get back with your knight. Here Magnus Carlsen tried a different way. He tried now rook to e8. We have rook to c5. Really, this is a pure domination here for Teimour Radjabov. Knight to f7, bishop to d3, also threatening some discoveries, taking out the rook with the check. So that's why here king to h8 had to be played by Magnus. We have now rook to e8, rook to e8, and now b4. Now it's, I think, very important when we watch this position. It's very important now to put many pawns on dark horse, to put your pieces as much as you can on dark horse, because black is of course a light horse bishop. When you put many pawns on light horse, then these pawns can be attacked. Of course, now building a blockade, sort of building a structure on dark horse is perfect strategy here in the endgame for white. So here b4, the knight to d6, we have bishop to g6, cutting off here always the king. The king is now a little bit paralyzed in the corner there. Rook to e7, we have a4, we have king to g8, now king to e2, playing with the king, knight to e4, we have rook to c2, knight to f6, and now b5. Here we have c takes b5, a takes b5, we have a6, b takes a6, b takes a6, and now rook to b1. We have bishop to e8, but now a great move also by Teimour Radjabov. Rook to b8, of course, pinning the bishop. Here in the continuation, king to f8. Now Teimour uses this moments when all of the pieces are pinned, so he can now activate his knight. He can activate his knight by playing the knight on f5. Now the knight is really on a brilliant square. Here in the game, we have rook to e6 by Magnus. We have rook to a8, knight to d5, and now Magnus, pardon me, Teimour Radjabov simply takes bishop to e8, rook to e8, rook takes a6. Here Magnus tried now tactic, knight to f4, king to f3, knight to h5, and it seems so that Magnus has solved now all of the position problems, but the problem is a great tactical calculation by Teimour Radjabov. He plays now the move g4. After move knight to f6, here comes a great move, knight to h6. Here, even if you try, of course, knight to g4 is not a possibility. Here in the continuation, we have knight to e4. If you try, of course, g takes h6, then you get simply rook to f6, and white is simply winning with his three extra pawns, 3 pawns against 1 pawn in an endgame. As said, this is simply endgame that you have to win. So as said, after move knight to h6, here we have knight to e4, knight to f5 by Teimour Radjabov. We have knight to g5, king to g2. We have rook to b8. Here knight to d4. We have rook to a5 here by Teimour Radjabov. Knight to e4, rook to e5, attacking the knight. Knight to f6. Here f3, g6. We have king to g3, rook to b1, rook to b4, rook to b5, trying to trade off the rooks. Of course, simplifying the game, because this is now, as I said, completely winning for Teimour Radjabov. We have rook takes b5, knight to b5. Here g5 played by Magnus Carlsen, knight to c3, king to g6, and after f4 in this position, Magnus Carlsen resigns. So he knows that this is simply a winning endgame, and he resigned here. And after day one, it means now that it's an equal result, so no one has now advantage. Tomorrow we'll know who is moving up to the finals. I'm a little bit happy, I have to say it, because I think Teimour Radjabov deserved the win in this game. In the game 3, Magnus Carlsen deserved this win. So brave decision by Teimour Radjabov to go into this sharp Ragozin line. I think, as I said, if you want to study the Ragozin, this is a great approach also, that you can use this queen to a4 move in the later stage of the game. Maybe instead of this bishop to g5, you can try this one if you don't want, as I said, to study too much of a theory. Queen to a4, perfectly fine, forcing now black simply to play knight to c6. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. This h4 h5 idea by Teimour Radjabov, brilliant attack by the very sharp attacker. So if you want to see more games from the tournament, check out my also previous analyzed games that we have covered so far on my YouTube chess channel. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link of our very nice series. And if you want to see maybe the engines battling it out in their best chess games, check out my commented chess games played by computer series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.